The black Bentley moved slowly through the London streets, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of streetlights. Inside, Queen Camilla sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap as she watched the city pass by through tinted windows. Tonight was different from her usual royal duties. This wasn't just another ribbon-cutting or garden party where she would stand beside King Charles, offering gentle smiles and polite conversation. Tonight, she would be the center of attention at the Children's Hospital Foundation dinner, her first major solo appearance as Queen Consort. The weight of this responsibility pressed on her shoulders like an invisible crown. Every move she made tonight would be watched, analyzed, and discussed in newspapers around the world. Her press secretary had reminded her 3 times that morning about the importance of this event. The charity had been close to her heart for years, long before she held the title of queen. She had visited sick children, comforted worried parents, and helped raise millions of pounds for medical research. But tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't just Camilla supporting a good cause. She was Queen Camilla, representing the monarchy. The car slowed as they approached the Grand Hotel where the gala was being held. Through the window she could see the red carpet stretching from the curb to the golden entrance doors. Photographers lined both sides, their cameras already flashing even though she hadn't stepped out yet. Security barriers held back curious onlookers who had gathered to catch a glimpse of royalty. The scene looked like something from a movie, all bright lights and elegant decorations. Her lady-in-waiting, Patricia, sat across from her, making final adjustments to the evening's schedule. On her tablet, Patricia had been with the royal family for over 20 years and had seen it all. She looked up and noticed the Queen's thoughtful expression. "Your Majesty, you look absolutely radiant tonight," Patricia said with genuine warmth. The emerald gown was definitely the right choice. "It brings out your eyes beautifully." Queen Camilla smiled, touching the delicate diamond necklace at her throat. The dress had been chosen weeks ago, fitted and refitted until it was perfect. The deep green silk caught the light in just the right way, and the modest neckline struck the perfect balance between elegance and appropriateness. Her hair was styled in a classic updo, with just a few soft curls framing her face. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. "Thank you, Patricia. I just hope the evening goes smoothly. There's always that little voice in the back of my mind wondering what could go wrong," the Queen admitted, her voice carrying just a hint of nervousness. "Nothing will go wrong, Your Majesty. The security team has been planning this for weeks. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson personally oversaw all the arrangements. You know how thorough he is," Patricia reassured her. Outside, the security detail was indeed thoroughly prepared. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson stood near the hotel entrance, speaking quietly into his radio as he coordinated the final positions of his team. He had been protecting members of the royal family for over 15 years, and he took his job seriously. Tonight's event had required careful planning because of the large number of guests and media presence. His team included 12 officers, each with specific responsibilities. Some would patrol the perimeter, others would stay close to the Queen, and a few would remain inside the building monitoring the crowd. Every entrance and exit had been checked multiple times. The guest list had been reviewed and cross-referenced with security databases. Even the hotel staff had been vetted and briefed on security protocols. Among his team was guard Michael Thompson, a man Wilson trusted completely. Thompson had been protecting royals for 15 years, starting as a young constable and working his way up to become one of the most reliable officers in the unit. He was known for his attention to detail and his ability to spot potential problems before they became serious. Tonight, Thompson's job was to position himself near the main entrance and watch for any signs of trouble in the crowd. Thompson stood at his assigned spot, his trained eyes scanning the faces of photographers and onlookers. He knew how to read a crowd, how to spot someone who didn't belong or whose behavior seemed suspicious. His earpiece crackled softly with updates from other team members as they confirmed their positions and reported that all was clear. The crowd was growing larger as word spread that the Queen would be arriving soon. Most of the people were harmless royal watchers who came to these events hoping to catch a glimpse of famous faces. There were elderly ladies who had followed the royal family for decades, young couples taking photos with their phones, and curious tourists who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Among the photographers, veteran royal correspondent James Mitchell adjusted his camera settings for the evening light. He had covered royal events for 30 years and had photographed Queen Camilla countless times. Tonight felt special to him, because he understood the significance of her first major solo appearance as queen. He positioned himself where he would have the best angle as she walked down the red carpet. "This is a big moment for her," he said to his colleague standing nearby. "She's been in the shadow of the king for so long. Tonight, she gets to shine on her own." Inside the hotel, the charity's organizers were making final preparations. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant venue with round tables covered in crisp white linens and centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath. A stage at the front of the room featured a podium where the queen would give her speech later in the evening. The charity's director, Helen Roberts, walked through the room one last time, checking every detail. Helen had worked with Queen Camilla many times over the years and had always been impressed by her genuine interest in the children's welfare. The queen didn't just appear at events for photo opportunities. She actually listened to the doctors, asked thoughtful questions, and remembered details about specific cases from previous visits. Tonight's gala was expected to raise over £2 million for new medical equipment and research programs. Back in the Bentley, Queen Camilla could see that they were almost at the hotel. Her driver, Robert, had been driving for the royal family for 20 years and knew exactly how to time their arrival. He would pull up smoothly to the red carpet, pause for exactly 30 seconds to allow photographers to get their shots of the car, and then the door would be opened by a footman in full uniform. "2 minutes, Your Majesty," Patricia announced, checking her watch. Queen Camilla took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She had done this hundreds of times before, but it never got completely routine. Each public appearance required her to switch from being a private person to being a public figure, a symbol of the monarchy and all it represented. The car came to a gentle stop exactly where the red carpet began. Through the window, she could see the explosion of camera flashes that always accompanied royal arrivals. The crowd pressed forward against the barriers, trying to get a better view. Security officers moved into their final positions as Detective Chief Inspector Wilson spoke into his radio. "Royal arrival in progress. All units maintain positions and stay alert." Guard Thompson heard the announcement through his earpiece and straightened slightly, his eyes continuing to sweep the crowd. Everything looked normal: excited faces, raised cameras, the usual controlled chaos of a royal event. He was positioned perfectly to monitor both the crowd and the Queen's path from the car to the hotel entrance. The footman approached the car door, his white gloves pristine and his movements precise. This was his moment to play a small but important part in the evening's carefully choreographed events. He had practiced the timing dozens of times: wait for the car to come to a complete stop, count to 30, then open the door with a respectful. Inside the car, Queen Camilla gathered her evening bag and made sure her dress was arranged properly. Patricia gave her one final encouraging smile as they prepared for the door to open. In just a few seconds, the Queen would step out into the bright lights and begin what everyone expected to be a triumphant evening. The footman's hand reached for the door handle as photographers raised their cameras, and the crowd fell into an expectant hush. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the first glimpse of Queen Camilla as she began her solo royal engagement. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson watched from his position near the entrance, satisfied that his security arrangements were working perfectly, his team was in place, the crowd was under control, and the evening was beginning exactly as planned. He had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, everything would change in a way that none of them could have predicted. The door opened, and Queen Camilla placed her foot on the red carpet, ready to begin an evening that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Queen Camilla stepped gracefully from the Bentley, her emerald gown flowing elegantly as she placed her feet firmly on the red carpet. The camera flashes exploded around her like fireworks, creating a wall of bright light that would have been overwhelming to anyone not used to royal life. But she had learned over the years how to smile naturally despite the blinding lights, how to move with confidence even when she couldn't see clearly where she was going. She paused for a moment beside the car, allowing the photographers to capture their shots. This was all part of the careful dance of royal appearances. Give the media what they need, but maintain dignity and control at all times. Her smile was warm and genuine as she acknowledged the crowd with a gentle wave. Some people in the barriers called out, "Your Majesty," and "Welcome," in excited voices. The red carpet stretched before her like a river of crimson, lined with elegant rope barriers that kept the growing crowd at a safe distance. Hotel staff stood at attention in their finest uniforms, ready to escort her inside. When the time came, everything was proceeding exactly according to the detailed plan that had been rehearsed multiple times over the past week. Guard Thompson maintained his position near the main entrance, his experienced eyes continuing to scan the crowd for any signs of trouble. The faces he saw were typical for this type of event: excited royal watchers, curious tourists, and members of the press. Nothing seemed out of place. An elderly woman in the front row clutched a small Union Jack flag, her face beaming with joy at seeing the Queen so close. A young father held his daughter on his shoulder so she could get a better view, both of them smiling widely. Queen Camilla began her walk down the red carpet, moving at the practiced pace that allowed photographers to get clear shots while not lingering too long in any one spot. She had mastered this particular skill over many years of public appearances. Too fast and the photos would be blurry. Too slow, and she would appear hesitant or uncertain. The pace had to be just right to project confidence and grace. As she walked, she caught sight of some familiar faces in the crowd. There was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly lady who seemed to appear at every royal event in London. The Queen had actually spoken with her several times over the years and always enjoyed seeing her enthusiastic support. There was also David Chen, a photographer who had been covering royal events for decades and who always managed to capture the most flattering angles. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson watched the proceedings with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. His officers were in their assigned positions, the crowd was well behaved, and the Queen looked radiant as she made her way toward the hotel entrance. He spoke quietly into his radio, updating his team on the Queen's progress. "Royal One is halfway to the entrance. All clear from my position," he reported. The other officers responded with their own updates, confirming that their assigned areas were secure. The event was unfolding like clockwork, exactly as Wilson had hoped when he spent those long hours planning every detail of the security arrangements. But as Queen Camilla continued her walk, something was happening that none of them could have anticipated. Guard Thompson's earpiece suddenly crackled to life with an urgent transmission that would change everything about the evening. "All units, we have a possible security concern in Sector 7. Stand by for further instructions," came the voice through the radio. Thompson's training kicked in immediately. Sector 7 was the area behind the main hotel building, near the service entrance where catering trucks and staff vehicles came and went. Any security concern in that area could potentially affect the Queen's safety, especially if someone was trying to use the service areas to gain unauthorized access to the building. The voice on the radio continued, and Thompson strained to hear every word over the noise of the crowd and the clicking of camera shutters. The transmission was slightly garbled, which sometimes happened when officers were moving through areas with poor radio reception, but he thought he heard something about immediate response required and potential threat assessment. Queen Camilla was now 3/4 of the way to the hotel entrance, still smiling and acknowledging the crowd. She was completely unaware that her security team was dealing with a developing situation. This was exactly how it should be. The Queen should never have to worry about security matters during public appearances. That was why people like Thompson were there, to handle problems quietly and efficiently without disrupting the event. Thompson's mind raced as he tried to process the information he was receiving. His 15 years of experience had taught him that security concerns could escalate quickly, if not addressed immediately. He had seen situations that seemed minor at first but developed into serious problems because officers didn't respond fast enough or didn't take initial reports seriously enough. Another transmission came through his earpiece, and this time the urgency in the voice was unmistakable. Thompson thought he heard something about moving toward the main building and requires immediate attention from nearest available officer. The signal was breaking up, making it difficult to get a complete picture of what was happening, but his training told him that any potential threat to the Queen's safety had to be taken seriously. Looking around quickly, Thompson realized that he was indeed the officer closest to Sector 7. The other members of the security team were positioned around the main entrance and along the red carpet route, exactly where they were supposed to be according to the plan. If someone needed to respond to whatever was happening in Sector 7, logic dictated that it should be him. But leaving his assigned position went against everything he had been taught about royal protection duty. Officers were assigned specific spots for good reasons, and abandoning those positions could create gaps in the security coverage. Thompson felt torn between his duty to maintain his assigned post and his understanding that a potential threat needed immediate attention. The crowd around him continued to cheer and take photos, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the security team's communications. Queen Camilla was now just steps away from the hotel entrance, her progress steady and confident. To everyone watching, the evening was proceeding perfectly. Thompson made a split-second decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Based on what he believed he had heard through his earpiece, he concluded that the threat in Sector 7 required immediate investigation and that he was the logical officer to respond. In his mind, the Queen was almost safely inside the building, surrounded by other security personnel who could handle her protection for the few minutes it would take him to check on the situation. Without consulting Detective Chief Inspector Wilson or any of his colleagues, Thompson turned away from his assigned position. He began walking quickly toward the back of the building, his hand moving instinctively to his radio to confirm his response to the situation. As he moved, he tried to radio back to the officer who had reported the security concern, but the transmission seemed to have ended. Behind him, Queen Camilla continued her approach to the hotel entrance, unaware that her primary security coverage had just evaporated. The photographers continued taking pictures, the crowd continued cheering, and the evening's carefully planned choreography continued to unfold. But now there was a crucial gap in the security arrangements that no one had noticed yet. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson was focused on coordinating the Queen's entry into the building and hadn't immediately realized that Thompson had left his position. The other officers were maintaining their assigned posts and assumed that Thompson was doing the same. It would be several more seconds before anyone realized that something had gone terribly wrong with their security coverage. Thompson reached the corner of the building and paused, looking around for any sign of the security concern that had prompted his response. The area appeared completely normal. A few catering staff were cleaning up after an earlier delivery, and a hotel maintenance worker was checking the locks on a service door. Nothing seemed threatening or out of place. He tried his radio again, attempting to contact the officer who had reported the problem. "This is Thompson responding to Sector 7. Can you provide an update on the security concern?" He spoke into his radio but received only static in response. A growing sense of unease began to settle over him as he realized that he might have misunderstood the situation. The urgency he had heard in the radio transmission now seemed less clear in his memory. Had he really heard immediate response required, or had his mind filled in gaps in a garbled transmission? Had the officer really said the threat was moving toward the main building, or had Thompson's experience and training led him to assume the worst? As these doubts crept into his mind, Thompson began to understand that he might have made a serious error in judgment. He had abandoned his assigned position based on incomplete information, leaving a gap in the Queen's security coverage at one of the most critical moments of the evening. The realization hit him like a physical blow as he started to comprehend the magnitude of his mistake. Meanwhile, at the hotel entrance, Queen Camilla was approaching the final steps of her red carpet walk, still confident that everything was proceeding according to plan. Queen Camilla reached the final section of the red carpet, her confidence steady as she approached what should have been the smooth conclusion of her entrance. The hotel's golden doors gleamed ahead of her, flanked by elegant arrangements of white roses and the royal standard flying proudly above. Everything looked exactly as it should for a perfectly orchestrated royal arrival. But as she took her next steps, something felt different. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, that she couldn't quite identify at first. Her years of experience at public events had given her an almost instinctive ability to sense when something wasn't quite right, and that feeling was beginning to creep into her consciousness now. She looked ahead toward the hotel entrance, expecting to see the familiar and reassuring figure of Guard Thompson in his assigned position. Thompson had been part of her security detail for several major events over the past year, and she had come to recognize his steady presence as a sign that everything was under control. He was always exactly where he was supposed to be, alert and professional, ready to handle any situation that might arise. But Thompson wasn't there. The space where he should have been standing was simply empty. Queen Camilla's step faltered almost imperceptibly as she processed this unexpected absence. Her smile remained in place. Years of training had taught her to maintain her composure regardless of circumstances. But inside, a small alarm bell began to ring. She glanced around discreetly, trying to spot Thompson without making her search obvious to the watching cameras. Perhaps he had moved to a different position. Maybe there had been some last-minute change to the security arrangements that she hadn't been informed about. She looked for Detective Chief Inspector Wilson, hoping to catch his eye and get some silent reassurance that everything was proceeding according to plan. But Wilson was positioned further back, coordinating with other officers and monitoring the crowd. He hadn't yet noticed that Thompson had abandoned his post, and he was too far away for Queen Camilla to make eye contact without turning around completely, which would have looked strange to the photographers. The absence of her expected security coverage created an unusual situation that Queen Camilla had never experienced before. Throughout her years of public appearances, there had always been a clear and visible security presence around her. Officers might be discreet, but they were always there, always watching, always ready. The feeling of being exposed, even for a few seconds, was deeply unsettling. She continued walking forward because stopping would have created even more attention, but her pace slowed slightly as uncertainty crept in. The photographers noticed the subtle change in her demeanor, though they couldn't identify what was causing it. Some of them lowered their cameras for a moment, wondering if something was happening that they should be aware of. James Mitchell, the veteran royal photographer, was among the first to sense that something wasn't quite right. He had photographed hundreds of royal events and had developed an eye for the subtle signs that indicated when things weren't going according to plan. The Queen's smile was still in place, but there was something in her posture that suggested uncertainty. "Something's different," he murmured to his colleague standing nearby. "Look at her body language. She's not moving with her usual confidence." Other photographers began to notice it too. The Queen's usual graceful stride had become more cautious, more deliberate. She was looking around more than usual, her eyes scanning the area in a way that suggested she was searching for something or someone. These were the kinds of subtle details that experienced royal watchers picked up on, small changes that could indicate a larger story developing. Queen Camilla reached the point where Thompson should have been standing, and the reality of his absence became undeniable. She paused, ostensibly to acknowledge the crowd one final time before entering the hotel, but really to give herself a moment to assess the situation and decide how to proceed. The pause stretched longer than it should have. In the carefully choreographed world of royal appearances, timing was everything. Every pause, every wave, every smile was planned to last a specific amount of time. When those timings went off schedule, everyone involved in the event noticed, even if the general public didn't understand what was happening. The crowd began to sense that something unusual was occurring. The cheering continued, but there was an undercurrent of confusion as people realized that the Queen wasn't moving forward as expected. Some of the people in the front row began looking around, trying to figure out what had caused the delay. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly royal watcher who had attended dozens of these events, turned to the person standing next to her. "This isn't how it usually goes," she said with concern in her voice. "She should have been inside by now. Something's not right." The uncertainty began to spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond. People who had been cheering and taking photos started murmuring among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to curiosity, and then toward something approaching concern. Queen Camilla stood in this growing bubble of uncertainty, acutely aware that every second of delay was being noticed and would likely be analyzed later. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, not just from the crowd but from the cameras that were capturing every moment for broadcast around the world. Her training told her to project confidence regardless of the circumstances, but the absence of her expected security coverage was creating a level of vulnerability that she had rarely experienced. She was used to feeling protected at public events, surrounded by professionals whose job was to anticipate and prevent problems before they could affect her safety or comfort. Patricia, her lady-in-waiting, was still inside the car, gathering her things and preparing to follow the Queen into the hotel. She couldn't see what was happening on the red carpet and had no way of knowing that the carefully planned event was beginning to unravel. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson finally looked toward the hotel entrance and immediately realized that something was wrong. Thompson was nowhere to be seen, and the Queen was standing alone in a position where she should have been surrounded by security personnel. The sight sent a jolt of alarm through his experienced mind as he quickly began to assess the situation. He spoke urgently into his radio, trying to locate Thompson and understand what had happened to the security coverage. "Thompson, report your position immediately," he commanded, but received no immediate response. The officer was too far away to hear Wilson's radio calls and was still investigating the non-existent security threat that had drawn him away from his post. Wilson began moving quickly toward the Queen's position, but he was several yards away and would need precious seconds to reach her. In the world of royal security, seconds could feel like hours when something went wrong. Queen Camilla made the decision to continue forward, even without the security coverage she had expected. Standing still was drawing more attention than moving, and she knew that the best way to handle the situation was to proceed with as much normalcy as possible. But her movements now carried a tension that hadn't been there before. The photographers pressed closer, sensing that something newsworthy was developing. Their professional instincts told them that this pause, this uncertainty, might be the most interesting part of the entire evening. Cameras that had been lowered were raised again, and shutters began clicking more rapidly. Social media users in the crowd began posting about the unusual delay. "Something weird happening at the Royal Gala," one person tweeted, along with a shaky video of the Queen's prolonged pause. "Queen looks confused about something," posted another, sharing a photo that captured the uncertainty in her expression. The hotel staff at the entrance began to realize that their carefully rehearsed timing was off. They had been expecting the Queen to arrive at their doors at a specific moment, and that moment had passed. The doormen exchanged glances, uncertain whether they should step forward to escort her or wait for some signal about how to proceed. Queen Camilla finally resumed, walking toward the entrance, but the damage to the evening's choreography had been done. What should have been a smooth, confident arrival had turned into an awkward moment of public uncertainty. The gap in her security coverage had lasted less than a minute, but in the context of a royal event, that minute felt like an eternity. She approached the hotel doors. She could see Detective Chief Inspector Wilson hurrying toward her position, his face showing the professional concern of someone who knew that his carefully laid plans had gone wrong. Relief washed over her as she realized that her security team was responding to whatever had caused the problem. But the moment of vulnerability had already been captured by dozens of cameras and witnessed by hundreds of people. The evening that was supposed to showcase her confidence and competence as Queen Consort had instead created a moment of public uncertainty that would be analyzed and discussed for days to come. And somewhere behind the hotel, Guard Thompson was only beginning to realize the magnitude of the mistake that had set all of these events in motion. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson reached Queen Camilla just as she approached the hotel entrance, his professional composure intact despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. He smoothly positioned himself where Thompson should have been, his presence immediately filling the security gap that had left the Queen exposed for those critical moments. "Your Majesty," he said quietly as he fell into step beside her, his voice calm and reassuring despite the crisis unfolding around them. "Everything is secure. We'll have you inside momentarily." Queen Camilla nodded slightly, grateful for his steady presence but unable to completely shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled over her during those uncertain moments on the red carpet. Her smile returned to its proper brightness as the hotel doorman stepped forward to escort her inside. But Wilson could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her eyes continued to scan the area around them. The hotel's grand lobby had been transformed for the evening's gala, with elegant floral arrangements and soft lighting creating the perfect atmosphere for a royal reception. As Queen Camilla entered, the assembled guests who had been waiting for her arrival broke into polite applause. Hotel staff members lined up in their finest uniforms, ready to be presented to Her Majesty according to the carefully planned protocol. But behind the scenes, Wilson's security team was dealing with a rapidly developing crisis. The veteran inspector spoke urgently into his radio as he maintained his position near the Queen, trying to understand what had happened to Thompson and whether there were any genuine security threats they needed to address. "All units, report. Status immediately," he commanded through his earpiece. "I need eyes on Thompson's location right now." The responses came back quickly from his positioned officers, each confirming that their assigned areas were secure but none able to explain Thompson's disappearance from his critical post. Wilson's 15 years of experience in royal protection had taught him that when something went wrong during a public event, every second counted in containing the situation and preventing it from escalating. Meanwhile, Thompson had finally realized the scope of his error. Standing behind the hotel near the service entrance, he had found no evidence of any security threat in Sector 7. The area was quiet and normal, with only the usual hotel staff going about their routine duties. His attempts to contact whoever had reported the original security concern had met with silence. The awful truth began to dawn on him as he replayed the radio transmission in his mind. The garbled communication that had seemed so urgent just minutes ago now appeared far less clear. Had he misunderstood the message completely? Had his experience and training led him to assume a threat that didn't actually exist? His radio crackled with Wilson's urgent calls for his location, and Thompson realized that his absence had been discovered. The professional tone in Wilson's voice carried an undertone of controlled anger that Thompson had rarely heard in their years of working together. He knew immediately that his career was likely over. "Inspector Wilson, this is Thompson," he responded into his radio, his voice heavy with the realization of what he had done. "I'm at the service entrance investigating a reported security concern in Sector 7. I'm returning to position immediately." "Stay exactly where you are, Thompson." Wilson's voice came back, sharp and unforgiving. "Do not move until I send someone to escort you out of the building. You are relieved of duty effective immediately." The finality in those words hit Thompson like a physical blow. 15 years of faithful service, hundreds of successful events, and an impeccable record had been destroyed in a matter of minutes by one terrible decision. He leaned against the wall of the building, feeling the weight of his mistake settling on his shoulders like a crushing burden. Inside the hotel, Queen Camilla was being guided through the reception area where charity, organizers, and distinguished guests were waiting to meet her. Helen Roberts, the charity director, approached with a warm smile, ready to begin the evening's program of introductions and speeches. To casual observers, everything appeared to be proceeding normally, but those who knew royal events well could sense the underlying tension. Patricia, Queen Camilla's lady-in-waiting, had finally caught up with the group after gathering her things from the car. She immediately noticed that something was different about the Queen's demeanor. After years of working closely with her, Patricia could read the subtle signs that indicated when the Queen was dealing with stress or uncertainty. "Is everything all right, Your Majesty?" Patricia asked quietly, as they paused between introductions. "There was a small security matter outside," Queen Camilla replied in a low voice. "Nothing serious, but it was rather unsettling for a moment." Patricia nodded, understanding, knowing that in the world of royal security, even small matters could have significant implications. She made a mental note to follow up with Wilson later to understand what had happened and whether any adjustments needed to be made to future events. Outside, the photographers were already reviewing their images and beginning to piece together the story of what had transpired. James Mitchell scrolled through the photos on his camera's display, studying the sequence of images that showed Queen Camilla's arrival and the moment when her confidence seemed to falter. "Look at this," he said to his colleague, showing him a particular photograph. You can see the exact moment when she realized something was wrong. Her whole body language changes between this shot and the next one. Other photographers were having similar conversations, comparing their images and trying to understand what had caused the Queen's obvious uncertainty. Several of them began uploading their photos to news agencies, knowing that any unusual moment during a royal event would be of interest to editors around the world. The social media posts from people in the crowd were already beginning to spread, with hashtags like Saburi Queen Camilla and Bien Royal Gala trending as people shared their observations about the strange pause in the proceedings. Video clips showing the Queen's momentary confusion were being shared and commented on, with royal watchers trying to analyze what they had witnessed. Back inside the hotel, Wilson continued to coordinate his team while maintaining his protective position near the Queen. He had dispatched 2 officers to escort Thompson from the premises, knowing that the guards' continued presence would only create more complications. The immediate security situation was now under control, but Wilson knew that the evening's events would require extensive review and explanation. His radio crackled with an update from the officers he had sent to collect Thompson. "Inspector, we have Thompson secured and are escorting him to the service exit. He's cooperating fully and requests permission to submit a written report explaining his actions." "Granted," Wilson replied curtly. "But he is not to have any contact with media or unauthorized personnel. This situation is to be contained until we can conduct a full investigation." Queen Camilla had moved into the main ballroom where the charity gala was being held. The room looked spectacular, with dozens of round tables set with fine china and crystal glassware, and a stage decorated with the charity's banners and flowers. Despite the earlier incident, she was determined to fulfill her commitment to the Children's Hospital Foundation and deliver the speech she had prepared. But even as she smiled and chatted with the charity's supporters, part of her mind remained focused on what had happened outside. The feeling of being abandoned by her security, even briefly, had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Throughout her years of public service, she had come to rely on the invisible but constant presence of protection officers who ensured her safety and peace of mind. Helen Roberts introduced Queen Camilla to the evening's other speakers and outlined the program for the remainder of the event. The charity director was skilled at reading the moods of her royal patron and could sense that something had disturbed the Queen's usual composure, though she was too professional to ask directly about it. "Your Majesty, we're so honored to have you here tonight," Helen said warmly. "I know the children at the hospital will be thrilled to hear about your support for our new research wing." "Thank you, Helen. This cause has always been very close to my heart," Queen Camilla replied, her voice carrying its usual warmth despite the evening's earlier complications. "I'm looking forward to hearing about the progress you've made this year." As the evening's program continued, news of the security incident was already beginning to reach royal correspondents and palace officials who weren't present at the event. Phone calls were being made, questions were being asked, and the machinery of royal damage control was beginning to engage. Wilson knew that he would be spending the rest of the night and possibly the next several days explaining what had happened, and how such a breach of protocol had been allowed to occur. His reputation as one of the most reliable security coordinators in the Royal Protection Unit was now under scrutiny, and he would need to provide clear answers about the failure of his carefully planned arrangements. But for now, his immediate concern was ensuring that the remainder of Queen Camilla's evening proceeded without further incident. He positioned his remaining officers strategically around the ballroom and maintained constant communication with his team outside the building. Whatever had gone wrong earlier, dawn broke gray and overcast over London as Queen Camilla sat in her private study at Clarence House, still wearing her dressing gown as she read through the morning newspapers spread across her desk. The headlines made for uncomfortable reading, with several publications featuring photographs from the previous evening that captured her moment of uncertainty on the red carpet. Queen's security scare at Charity Gala read the front page of one tabloid, accompanied by a large photograph, showing her standing alone where Thompson should have been positioned. Another newspaper had chosen the headline, "Camilla left unprotected at royal event," with a detailed analysis of what their royal correspondent described as an unprecedented breach of royal security protocol. She set down the papers with a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of embarrassment settling over her again. The charity gala had ultimately been successful. They had raised over £2 million for the Children's Hospital, but the evening would be remembered more for the security incident than for the important cause it was meant to support. Her private secretary knocked gently on the door before entering with a cup of tea and additional briefing materials. "Your Majesty, Detective Chief Inspector Wilson has submitted his preliminary report on last evening's incident. Would you like me to summarize the key findings?" "Please do," Queen Camilla replied, accepting the tea gratefully. She had slept poorly, her mind replaying those uncomfortable moments when she had felt so exposed and uncertain in front of the cameras and crowd. It appears that Guard Thompson responded to what he believed was an urgent security alert, but there was a critical miscommunication in the radio transmissions. The investigation is still ongoing, but initial findings suggest that Thompson misinterpreted a routine communication about a minor maintenance issue in the service area. Queen Camilla shook her head slowly, trying to understand how such a significant error could have occurred. 15 years of service and it comes down to a misunderstood radio message? The inspector's report indicates that Thompson had been working extended hours due to staff shortages in the protection unit. Fatigue may have contributed to his poor judgment in leaving his assigned position without proper authorization or communication with his team leader. Across London, Thompson sat in his small flat in South London, staring at his resignation letter on the kitchen table. He had spent most of the night writing and rewriting the document, trying to find words that could adequately express his remorse for the mistake that had ended his career. The letter was addressed to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, with copies to go to Detective Chief Inspector Wilson and the Palace Security Coordinator. His phone had been ringing constantly since news of the incident broke, with journalists trying to get his side of the story and colleagues calling to offer support or ask for details. He had turned off the phone after the 10th call, unable to face explaining his actions to anyone else until he had fully understood them himself. The radio transmission that had seemed so urgent the night before now appeared completely benign when he reviewed the official communications log. A maintenance worker at the hotel had reported a problem with a service door lock, and the duty officer had simply noted it for the building's security team to address. Somehow, in Thompson's tired mind and through the filter of 15 years of training to anticipate threats, this routine message had become an urgent security alert requiring immediate response. He picked up his pen and added one final paragraph to his resignation letter. "I take full responsibility for my actions on the evening of September 4th, 2025. My decision to abandon my assigned position was a serious breach of protocol that compromised the security of Her Majesty Queen Camilla. No amount of explanation can excuse this failure of duty, and I accept that my resignation is the appropriate consequence for my actions." Meanwhile, at Scotland Yard headquarters, Commissioner Patricia Williams was reviewing Wilson's detailed incident report with the head of the Royal Protection Unit. The investigation had been thorough and swift, with interviews conducted with all security personnel present at the event, and a complete review of radio communications and security protocols. "This appears to have been a perfect storm of unfortunate circumstances," the commissioner observed, as she closed the file. "Staff fatigue, unclear radio communications, and an officer making assumptions based on incomplete information. But the bottom line is that the Queen's security was compromised, however briefly." "Yes, ma'am." Inspector Wilson's team responded well once the situation was identified, but the gap in coverage should never have occurred in the first place. "We're recommending significant changes to our communication protocols and staffing requirements for future royal events." The palace was dealing with its own internal review of the incident. The Queen's private secretary had already fielded dozens of calls from government officials, royal correspondents, and international security experts, all wanting to understand how such a breach could have occurred. The incident had implications beyond just one evening's events. It raised questions about the overall effectiveness of royal security arrangements. Back at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was meeting with her senior staff to discuss how to respond. to the media coverage and public interest in the security incident. Her press secretary had prepared a brief statement acknowledging that there had been a minor security matter at the charity gala, but emphasizing that it had been quickly resolved and had not affected the success of the fundraising event. Your Majesty, we think it's best to focus public attention back on the charity and the important work being done at the Children's Hospital, the press secretary advised. The security incident will fade from the news cycle more quickly if we don't give it additional attention through detailed explanations or defensive statements. Queen Camilla nodded, though she knew that the incident would likely be referenced in future news stories about royal security for years to come. More concerning to her was the personal impact of the event. The feeling of vulnerability she had experienced had been genuinely unsettling, and she found herself questioning whether she could trust her security arrangements in the same way she had before. I want to understand what changes are being made to prevent this from happening again, she said firmly. I need to know that the people responsible for my safety are communicating clearly and following proper procedures. Last night's incident could have been much worse if there had been an actual threat. Her private secretary made notes about arranging a briefing with the new security protocols once they had been finalized. The palace would need to balance the Queen's need for reassurance with the security services requirement to keep their detailed procedures confidential. 3 days later, Thompson's resignation had been officially accepted, and he was clearing out his locker at the protection unit's headquarters. 15 years of service awards, commendations, and photographs from royal events went into a cardboard box, marking the end of a career that had been his greatest source of pride and purpose. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson approached as Thompson finished packing his belongings. Despite his anger about the security breach, Wilson had worked with Thompson long enough to understand that the incident had been the result of poor judgment rather than malicious intent. I'm sorry it ended this way, Michael, Wilson said quietly. Your service record speaks for itself, and everyone knows this was completely out of character for you. Thompson looked up from his packing, his face showing the strain of the past few days. I let her down, Inspector. I let the whole team down. 15 years of training, and when it mattered most, I made the worst possible decision. You made a mistake under pressure, with incomplete information, and after working too many hours without proper rest. The system failed you as much as you failed the system. That's why we're changing the protocols. The new protocols that emerged from the investigation were comprehensive and far-reaching. Radio communications would be clearer and more structured, with required confirmations for any officer movement away from assigned positions. Staffing levels would be increased to prevent officer fatigue, and backup procedures would be established to ensure that security gaps could be filled immediately if they occurred. Queen Camilla gradually regained her confidence in her security arrangements as she learned about these changes, but the incident had left a lasting impact on her approach to public events. She found herself more aware of her protection officers' positions and more conscious of the careful choreography that kept her safe during public appearances. The charity gala itself had raised more money than any previous event in the Foundation's history, partly due to the additional media attention generated by the security incident. In an ironic twist, Thompson's mistake had inadvertently brought more publicity to the Children's Hospital than the event would have received otherwise. 6 months later, Thompson found work as a private security consultant, his royal protection experience valuable despite the circumstances of his departure. He never spoke publicly about the incident, maintaining his discretion about royal security matters even after his career had ended. But he carried the memory of that evening as a reminder of how quickly